But the worst thing I ever done, I mixed up all this fake puke at home, and then I went to this movie theater, hid the puke in my jacket, climbed up to the balcony, and then I made a noise like this.
The light's on. That means I did it.
We have both done it.
Cool.
In multiple different facets of life.
Accurate statement. Yes. As, you know, as proven by... We don't need to get into that.
The fruit of our loins.
I mean, yeah, we can go there.
We have filled the earth.
If you want to go there, we can go there.
Well, this is a podcast by dads for dads.
That's fair. It's littered with dad jokes at times, so why not just talk about what makes us dads, you know? Rad dads at that. Rad
so
dads.
Easy Core has a whole new meaning.
Go on. Are you saying
that's as far ahead as I thought?
Are you saying we're easy? We're easy. That's why we have children. It didn't take I don't know where we're going with this. So I don't think we should go any further with it.
Yeah.
We're not really prepped on this one. Easy Core though, that's what we're going to talk about. This episode is like a week or so late, but that's kind of what happens when life gets in the way, I suppose. But before we get into all that, welcome to Growing Up Punk, the podcast about punk rock and all of its friends. I am David. That guy's Aaron. Hello, Aaron.
Hey, what's going on? Here I am.
Here you are. Make sure you go follow us on our updated social media stuff, because now Twitter and Instagram are just the same handle, at Growing Punk Pod. You can find our personal Instagrams, and, well, I'm on Twitter, so I think my personal Twitter is linked on ours, but yours isn't. It probably just says, you know, your hosts, at David Growing Up, and some butthead.
That's me.
Look
me up.
Yeah, there you go. That's what I'm going to change it to if it doesn't say that. Your hosts are at David Growing Up and some butthead. So
yeah. Well, maybe I'll get back into Twitter just so I have an excuse to
get on it. I was
tweet at
just
presidential candidates, or
you
I
could.
don't know what you do with that.
I don't know either, but. I had an interesting, speaking of Twitter, I sent you a screenshot of this, but I had kind of an interesting back and forth actually with Dragged Under, who I reviewed their record a couple of weeks ago now when it kind of first came out. But we had a guy named Jordan at JoJoFlow25 on Twitter was tweeting about, he was listening and he was tweeting about that episode, and he said, wow, the part of the last song does sound like the Weezer song. Never put two and two together till I heard the pod, which was, if you haven't listened to that episode yet, go listen to my review of Dragged Under, because I compare one of their songs with a Weezer song, and then I play the clips back to back, and you can see how close they are. But where it gets awesome is that Dragged Under replied to that said, legend has it that Weezer went forward in time and stole that from us. To which I
way to throw them under the bus,
right? To which I said, smart use of time travel, if you ask me. And then Dragged Under with a good one here said, you know the platform Deezer? That's how they do it. You upload to Deezer, and boom, Weezer goes back in time to steal your ideas. So I thought that was real good. So that's a reason why you should be on Twitter. And you know, if you, the listener, is on Twitter and you're not following us, get on it. All sorts. I mean. That was carried completely by Dragged Under, not so much me, but it was good. I thought it was funny.
Is Twitter a platform that like bands would typically reply to more consistently than like Instagram or Facebook?
I think it kind of.
Or is it just kind of?
It probably depends on the band. Like I've had interactions on both for sure with bands. I'm trying to think which would be more active. I mean, probably. I typically post more on Instagram, I think. I mean, actually, that's not even necessarily true. I definitely post more on Twitter now that I think about it, because on our Instagram, I typically just post the artwork for our new episodes for the most part. So, it's like once a week or whatever. But, yeah, I mean, I can think a handful of times for sure, like where I've had back and forths with Dragged Under, Handguns,
MXPX.
Mike from MXPX. There was one. There's a bit of back and forth. So I mean, maybe, I don't know. I've never really thought about it whether or not there's more back and forth on there. I find there's more like follows on Instagram. Like people are more willing to and likely to follow. Maybe it's just because on Instagram it's just pictures, so you just scroll. You know what I mean? Like it's less work to follow than it is on Twitter to like sit there and go, okay, what does this tweet say? What does this tweet say? And just move along. So. Maybe
and I'm more drawn to a picture than just a phrase or something. So,
well, and that's what I mean. Yeah, like I think that's part of it too. Is that just the visuals on Twitter? It's easier to kind of find yourself engaged and go, yeah, why not? I kind of like that picture. Let's see what they have to offer in the future, or what have you, right? Like, so I would definitely say in that regard, as far as the back and forth, it's pretty consistent, which is funny because like we've talked about this before. I mean, this is how you've gotten in contact with some of your interviews is just via Instagram. That we grew up in a time that wasn't really a thing at all, right? Like to be able to contact a band and just be like, hey, what's up, guys? Like that's very new to.
That's how you got blacklisted from shows.
Did you guys have any where you're just like, chill out?
No, I don't think so. It's just funny to think of messaging a band and be like, yeah, I'll be at the show. I'll be behind the venue when you're done to talk. I know I was like, oh, there's extra security there now.
Yeah, what the heck? It's never like this before.
And now it's just like, oh, cool, yeah, we want to talk about music. And I think a cool part about that is with the accessibility, I think there's less people now or it seems there's less people that are genuinely interested to talk about music instead of just, because there's so much. It'll be like, oh, this single or that or whatever. And so I think maybe it's just with punk bands or more underground music or whatever, but it seems that, even if they're in a bigger band, they're still stoked to talk about music because if you're reaching out to talk about that, then, they know you're legit. You're not just like looking for an autograph or something.
Yeah. So. I mean, at the same point, it's obvious that the internet, whether it's Twitter or Instagram or YouTube or whatever, can also be quite toxic. So I know I know a lot of artists will be like, oh, I don't even bother like reading reviews and stuff like that or reading YouTube comments and what have you, because a lot of times, they're just like people being toxic and dumb. So, but yeah, no, it seems to be like, it's awesome being able to have that back and forth. I think that social media provides. So all that said, go follow us at Growing Punk Pod on Instagram and Twitter and find our personal handles there as well. We are here to talk about this. So I think I said a few minutes ago that this episode's kind of a week late. Because we originally said it was going to be last week, and then just schedules and life and stuff got in the way. So we released your interview with Rob Kucherek of Autopilot Off, which was awesome. That was fun to listen through and go back and go, oh man, I definitely remember a lot of this. So this week, the episode, we're kind of getting back on track. We mentioned it on our Newfound Glory episode. We're going to talk about Easycore. Specifically on this episode, we're going to talk about A Day to Remember and Chunk, No Captain Chunk. Because we picked four of the big four, I guess you could say, of Easycore. The big four of Easycore.
Oh, look at that. We got a sweet tag name.
They're the big four of Easycore. So I guess first and foremost, we're going to get into A Day to Remember's album, Common Courtesy. So you actually, I think, you picked this one. You asked me, you said between this one and Homesick, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Homesick, in the past life of the podcast, I'd actually discussed it with Jordan.
Right.
Yeah. And so myself, I have like a little bit of, I was going to say experience. That's not the right word, but whatever. Familiarity with A Day to Remember. I basically for the most part completely missed the boat on Easycore in general. Every now and then, there was a time where I was just like, I don't know if I like the mixture of the pop punk and like metalcore sort of thing that's going on. So I kind of stayed away from it. Like A Day to Remember, when Homesick came out, I had a friend suggest it, so I definitely checked it out. He played it for me, and I remember listening to it and being like, yeah, this is kind of cool, because at that time I was more into in this world more into like heavier music, right? Like,
Yeah.
I never fully dove in. Like I was always more on the side of like, I mean, we briefly texted earlier today about like Hope's Fall, like that kind of stuff, where, you know, it's not necessarily full of breakdowns and whatever.
Right.
Although some of the stuff I listened to would be, but so like I was kind of intrigued, but at the same point I was also kind of like, okay. And then just sort of moved on. So I didn't really come around to them until a year or two ago. And then we decided to do this. And so you said Homesick, and I said, well, I've kind of done that one. Let's do a different one. So Common Courtesy is what we landed on. And I was glad because this album I actually wanted to listen to just by like kind of browsing their artwork. I was like,
Yeah.
that one's interesting. Like the artwork's pretty plain, but I was like, I'm in. So let's get your initial thoughts on Common Courtesy as a whole.
Yeah, well, even just to backtrack, just a quick
No
tangent. I mean, the first time I heard them, it was on their first like kind of official full length for those who have heart, and I do remember thinking, so this was back when I was still touring, and we would listen to it, you know, in the van, and it was like an odd thing. I remember everyone kind of being, you know, we would listen and it was popping, and all of a sudden we were like, what is going on right now?
Yeah.
Like it definitely didn't catch on right away, even though we all listened to popular stuff and heavier stuff. And there were heavy bands that had poppy parts to it, but
Right.
there was something different about them, which, I mean, I think is always cool when a band can kind of be ahead of a curve, so to
Sure,
speak, and just go for something. And obviously it's played well in their favor. Yeah, and then again, Homesick was an awesome album. Common Courtesy, so even with the artwork, you wouldn't have it just, I mean, if it was on digital, it just kind of has the C's, but on the actual CD, which I have, those are like die cutouts or whatever, and there is actual artwork that
It's
slips in behind.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the artwork is actually pretty cool. I think it's like 4 different panels of like hand-drawn or what do you call that, kind of graphic art or whatever. So
Yeah.
it is pretty cool. But
Sorry.
Well,
I was gonna say I'm trying to find because on Apple Music the only copy of Homesick I can find is like the special edition. So it's got different artwork. But I was gonna point out how often because I was gonna try and see like is in behind the C's. Like on the digital version here, I'm trying to like you can see like the guy's silhouette because they do that a lot, right? Like the back of someone and it's like a silhouette. They've got it on a number of different records, but I was trying to see if it's kind of like the same take on Homesick, but it's hard to tell just by the artwork that's on here, so I'm not 100% sure. But I do find that intriguing that a lot of their records outside of For Those Who Have Heart and I guess Old Record, kind of have that idea going on where it's like the back of someone like walking away or like you're behind. So I wonder what it is about that, because that's clearly what's going on in the artwork for Common Courtesy as well. They've just kind of hidden it a little bit with by covering it and then just cutting out. So on the actual CD though, is that what's inside of it? Like, do you remember the artwork when you open it out, like inside the like the cutouts?
Yeah, I can't remember which exact image it is because there's kind of, depending on how you fold that piece of paper in it, there's different images that you could put in behind there. I can't remember what the exact one is.
Interesting. It'd be interesting because even watching like their videos on YouTube, like just the album stream or whatever videos that they have on YouTube, inside the C's, it's like the image is actually like moving, like as if they're. I'm assuming they've taken the different, as you're talking about, the different images, and then they're just kind of panning in it. So like there's some movement to the video. It's nothing huge, but I know one of the ones I was watching for the songs that we're going to talk about, I was like, oh, that's not what's inside the artwork. It's something that's different. So I'm just wondering if it's the different panels that you're talking about that they're just kind of featuring in there. But that's kind of cool. That would have caught my eye for sure. Like picking up a physical copy. And I mean, we've talked about this so much, like, especially that's interesting to me because like that's clearly a record released in the digital age and they still put that thought into the artwork. Like we don't see that a lot, right? Like when people,
when that album came out or, I don't know if it came out directly onto streaming services,
right?
If there was, then just because of all the kind of drama that was going on. So I had actually backed that album because they had done I don't know if it was a Kickstarter. I mean, so if you don't know, there was a whole bunch of drama, going on with this album being released and the lawsuit with Victory Records.
Okay, yeah.
And
as I say, I don't know, but I saw some references to that in like when I was reading some. It was either comments on YouTube or whatever that people were referencing some of the lyrics, being like, "Oh, this is a direct thing at Victory." Yeah. But yeah, go on.
But yeah, it's all on Wikipedia or whatever. If listeners desire to go and get the whole story, if they didn't hear about it. So, anyways, they ended up. So, what was cool with this album is nobody, even the band, didn't know when it was going to be released because they were waiting to hear back from a lawyer on if they, if they could legally release it on their own without the label. And so, anyways, I had backed this album and I was anticipating it. And just kind of randomly, an email went out saying, "Hey, we heard back from the lawyer. We can release the album. Check your emails." And I can still remember that night, like I stayed up late that night. I brought my headphones down and listened through it and read all the lyrics, and which is fairly rare to do, in this day and age. Even when an album comes out that I'm really looking forward to, rarely will I set aside specific time to sit there and listen to them from front to back. And I don't even really remember why this one specifically, why I did that, but I think just the anticipation. They hadn't really released, I think they'd released maybe one song like 6 months prior before they kind of really knew what was going on with this lawsuit. And so there was all this kind of anticipation built up and people saying like, is it just going to bomb or whatever? And I mean, it ended up doing amazing. I think there was like, almost 100,000 copies or whatever in that first week or something. But yeah, I remember sitting there and just loving listening to this album. I loved Homesick and like I said, for those who have Heart before that. And just lots of really good standout moments. To me, this is my favorite A Day to Remember record. I feel like, they're one of those few bands that mix different genres within their sound. Sometimes they'll put the same, or they'll put different genres within one song. Sometimes it's completely different. And I feel like with this album, they kind of broke it up more than maybe past albums. So they still do have, popular songs with heavier parts. But I thought that, they kind of focused on making, and I know this is kind of a cliche thing to say, the heavier songs are heavier, the poppier are poppier, and whatever.
Yeah.
But as I listened to the whole thing, prepping for this, like, it just is, that's what it is. But I think it really worked in their favor. Like, to me, I would almost rather just a heavy song. We focused on heavy, like maybe still have some melodic parts to it. But I don't necessarily want like a super poppy song with breakdowns. I'd rather just kind of keep it segregated. And it seems to work for them. Like when I listen to it, it doesn't seem choppy to me or like back and forth. The tracks are mixed well in the alignment of songs, and so
I think like with Easycore in general, because I mean it's a similarity I see between this record and the next one we're going to talk, except kind of to further your point, on this record it seems to be done more just like the mixing of stuff, like whether it's kind of keeping the poppier songs poppier and the heavier songs heavier or whatever, but at the same point, like still a lot of those songs, like the poppier songs, I think they're still kind of heavier. Like, I mean, obviously heavier than, talking about a band like, I guess, more contemporaries at this point, like Knuckle Puck sort of thing, or Real Friends, right? Like they're not heavier bands by any means, right? So, but it's interesting that you kind of talk about the mix. I don't know if you're just talking about like the track listing and how that's laid out, or if when you say mix, like you're talking about the actual production and the mixing.
Like how the tracks are laid out.
Okay, yeah, because one of the issues I had with this record, and that I had with Homesick even, is that, and I guess it's not really a production thing. It feels like it could be a production thing, but the more I listen to A Day to Remember, I just realize it's a Jeremy thing. That's his name, right? Jeremy?
The singer, yeah.
Yeah. In that his voice, to me, just never sounds clear. Like it always sounds... There's a few times where it sounds clear, and it's on the softer songs, like one of which we'll talk about. And then there's at least one other acoustic song on the record, maybe another one. But like in most songs, I find that his vocals always feel, whether he's screaming or singing, like always feel a little bit muddy. And maybe it's because he puts like a natural distortion on his voice when he's singing. Like it's not like when he goes clean on these songs, he's just like flat out singing clean, you know, and then hitting falsettos and stuff like that. Like he's always got like a grit and a natural distortion on his voice. But it kind of like, I think the last time with the Homesick review that I did with Jordan, you know, forever ago, I think I described his vocals as like phlegmy. Like it just always sounds like something's in his throat. Which again, you just kind of get used to. One giant improvement I'd find from this record, not to compare too much to Homesick, but was that on Homesick, I just thought like the gang vocals were all so ridiculously overdone. And this record, that was one thing I was like, okay, I really want to listen to this one because like looking at the artwork, it looks more, you know, like put together and more professional and all this stuff. And knowing that Homesick was fairly early in their career, I'm like, I want to see the growth. And so for sure in songwriting, like this record took a step. And sticking with the vocals though, it's fun listening to his voice because I can pick out like with his singing voice, like so many different, kind of like comparisons. Like at first I was like, oh, it reminds me of Story of the Year at times. And then the more I listened to it, I texted you and I said, you remember the band Kids in the Way? Like when he sings his vocals, like when the guy from Kids in the Way would kind of like hit those big vocals. It reminds me of that. And then at times it reminds me of, I don't know if you ever listened to the band Biffy Clyro, but there's like parts where if you haven't, you should. There's parts where his vocals remind me of Biffy Clyro where I'm like, oh, this is neat. But, yeah, overall, my comment says vocals remind me of a mix between Kids in the Way, Biffy Clyro, and Mud. I just realized I wrote and Mud because they kind of sound muddy. But
that's funny you mentioned that because I have thought that about multiple A Day to Remember albums.
Yeah,
and to me, this one is actually the best produced one. The one before it, what separates me from you, and the one following, Bad Vibrations, both. And I don't really know why because they're like with bigger name producers, but there's just something that just doesn't sound like clear, and I don't really know what it is, but it drives me crazy because I will come in and I'm like, why does it just sound so...
Like, are you talking in general or just his vocals?
Well, in general, but yeah, also, and with his vocals, I mean, he's a great vocalist. Yeah. I don't know if it's just the kind of like raspiness that he has to it that, I don't know much about production to kind of pinpoint that, but I have felt in some of their records, it just doesn't sound nice and clear. I don't know what that is.
Well, and I find too with like even the production on this, it's just not like it's not punchy to me. Like it doesn't jump out. Like it sounds fine, right? But I just feel like it lacks a little bit of life. I don't know if that's the right word to use, but it's just and maybe that's like, you know, knowing what like pop punk and metalcore albums typically sound like. The guitars just don't seem to like be as bright, right? Like in like clear sounding. And I mean that could just be a preference too with their tones and how they play and whatever, right? Like it doesn't, by all means it's not a bad sounding record. It's just I always, whenever I listen to it, I'm like, I just wish there's a little more like life is the word that comes to mind, but I don't know if that's actually the right word. Because that makes it sound like it's a dead sounding record, but it's not. Before we get into talking about our songs, one thing I did want to point out that I love about A Day to Remember, and this goes back to like even talking about Homesick and whatever, but how they'll show their sense of humor within songs while still being a band that writes serious, heartfelt songs, right? Like, so for instance, on the song Right Back at It Again, right before the breakdown, when he says brace for impact, I just think that's great, right? Like, I'm like, oh, it gets me. And then one of the songs we're going to talk about, there's a piece at the beginning that I'm like, oh, that's fantastic. And going back to Homesick, how they like sing the intro on the very first song, right? Like the breakdown, the da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. I was like, like that stuff's just fun, right? And the fact, like they do it a fair bit. So without wasting any more time, though, let's talk about the first song that you picked, which is Sometimes You're the Hammer. Is it Sometimes You're the Hammer and Sometimes You're the Nail?
Yeah.
Something like that. But that's what we're going to talk about.
I love that title because I mean, it's
true.
It can kind of, it can kind of go anywhere in life, right? Sometimes you're the one kind of getting beat up and sometimes you're the one, you know, not to sound so dramatic, but.
Right.
But yeah, and it's, when you kind of think about the album, the stuff they were going through, it kind of makes it more interesting into kind of what their perspective of the song.
Well, and this was too like one of the songs I was talking about where they kind of do something fun in it, like the beginning of this song, with how he's like just kind of like mumbling the words, and he's like, "I got it," and then it like goes into the actual like the line and whatever. I'm like, that's pretty awesome. And then I mean, obviously at the end of this song, he's got the whole, I think, what is it? They finishes a line and then they all like harmonize on the word bitch. And then
I think that's on the opening track.
Is that? I don't know if it is. I feel maybe
it's definitely not on this one. It's either on the opening track or
actually no, it's on Right Back at It Again. It's on the song before this. But I love the part though where they're like talking about, do you think you should leave it in? Yeah, leave it in there. Leave it in there.
Yeah,
It's just kind of funny, but yeah.
What is?
Yeah,
I was gonna say, especially again with the overall kind of heaviness, that not musically heaviness, but just surrounding the legal stuff and whatever. I think adding those little parts just kind of helps it to be like, okay, like, they're going through all this crap, but they can still kind of, they still need to poke fun at things and not be super serious with it.
It seems like they've got their heads on their shoulders, which, I mean, obviously they, they're the reasons, like they started Self-Help Fest, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, they've obviously got kind of like an image and, a brand and a purpose as a band, a mission as a band, which is one of the things that I kind of appreciate about the band, even if there's like songs that don't necessarily pull me in, like, or records as a whole that necessarily pull me in. One thing I do love about the band though is like, in a time when like I should say they're kind of like one of the first bands that I'm aware of, and this probably isn't 100% accurate, but like going back to like the evolution of pop punk, I feel like they're kind of one of the first bands coming out of the era where pop punk was basically either silly or about having your heart broken or being in love with a girl, right? Or whatever.
Yeah.
And then they are like one of the first bands, like with a group of bands, that kind of turned the page a little bit and went, no, like pop punk can be serious too, right?
Yeah.
Which to an extent, I feel like with some bands, it's kind of been taken a little, like it's gotten quite melodramatic lyrically with some bands, but I feel like they're a great band that just kind of like did it really well, or is still doing it really well. I guess they're still a band that's together, still waiting on that new record to come out. But who knows? Who knows? Maybe by the time this comes out, it won't be out unless they surprise release it in the next couple days. But
But yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I think that's one reason why, even if some of the records aren't my favorite, I do appreciate just their lyrics and their kind of overall vibe. That their silliness isn't in like a typical Blink style punk.
Yeah,
but they still have that lightheartedness to it, but it's not like annoying and like high schoolish, I guess.
Hey, you watch your mouth about Blink.
Oh, I mean that's what makes a band like Blink.
Yeah.
But if A Day to Remember just tried kind of doing the same thing, I don't think it would play in their favor.
Right.
It would just be like, okay, we get it. You're just you're trying to bring that influence in, but I think this way it kind of holds their own and makes them stand out.
Oh, for sure. There's a line in this song that when I first read it, I was like, oh, that's fantastic. It says, that's why sad songs make me happy, because I don't have to feel alone. Which, I mean, the line itself, when you look at it, it's kind of like, it can come off as a little bit cheesy, but the sentiment behind the line, I think, is what I really get into. Is like, because I mean, obviously, sad songs can help people, like deal with things that they may be going through. But I like the idea, kind of like looking at that line and going, well, like just music in general, it doesn't have to be sad. It can be happy music, it can be angry music, it could be anything in between. It's just like stuff that. Music is something that you can feel and use as, whether you want to call it an anchor to get through things, or use it as something to kind of like, push you over the edge in a good way, like to take that step sort of thing. If you're, afraid of, taking a step or whatever, like just all sorts of things. I just like the idea of them recognizing and stating that, like music plays a big part in our everyday lives and how we face and deal with things. And it's just, again, part of like, I think their overall package that they're trying to portray as a band. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I think this is probably my favorite track on the album. This is the one, I remember when I was listening to it, the first two tracks were awesome, more kind of their classic punk sound. And I remember when this one came in, after that kind of pre-verse, and it just goes into that heavy part. And I was just like, man, yes, let's do this. And yeah, it's just a super like explosive song. That's kind of the word that comes to mind when I thought of it. I love the chorus on it is really catchy and helps to break it up. And the bridge on this song is one of my favorite parts on the whole album. Definitely my favorite bridge on the album. It really creates a cool space to the song. Kind of dies off a bit and then comes into this next part. And I mean, like lyrically, just really kind of vulnerable and kind of portrays what was going on. Yeah. The chorus is trying to take it away from me. And then I love the bridge, the lyrics, because it shows that maybe they've made mistakes as well. That this whole lawsuit or whatever is going on, isn't just about the label.
Yeah.
But instead of trying to be humble, trying to be humble every step of the way. And
when you're talking about the bridge, are you talking about the I reserve my right to be?
Yeah.
Okay. Like where it kind of quiets down and then comes back in, but
but then it gets so good at the end.
I'll say the outro of the song. I wasn't sure if you were going into that part yet, but the bridge of the song, I really like it. It also 110% reminds me of bands in the Christian post-hardcore metalcore scene of the early 2000s, just the overall sound of that, which is fine. It takes me back to a band that and an album that I never listened to until recent times has the ability to kind of take me back to something that I did listen to in the early 2000s. But I definitely like it. But yeah, getting into the outro of the song, it's heavy, not necessarily musically. It is. I mean, it's not the heaviest thing they've ever done by any means. In fact, it's fairly melodic in the end. But just the message and the lyrics in the outro, I think, are heavy. Right? I highlighted some of the. I think it's the last few lines of the song that says, "God help those with open hands. May they never feel burdened again. Yeah, I'll stand up for those who can't. I'll close the distance." And I was just that's pretty awesome. And to hear what they were kind of going through and to still have that, it'd be easy to get jaded, I feel to go through that, and to still have that outlook I'll stand up for those who can't. It doesn't matter what's going on with us over here. What's more important is this, right? So
and I will say there are songs later on the album where they are just kind of straight out F you kind of thing.
Yeah. For sure.
So but yeah, with this, I still remember when I heard this part, it almost brought me to tears. And I mean, not a lot of music does that, but it was just so powerful. Again, just knowing, what they were going through when they wrote this, and it just the music complements the emotion of the lyrics and the way he's singing it so well that I love this part so much.
Which is funny to think about when we keep saying what they were going through, because it was literally just a legal battle. But the way we've been wording it sounds like, they went through some kind of tragedy within the band sort of thing.
Right. Okay, yeah, so it wasn't tragedy, but it was
still a hard time.
They were basically feeling like they were getting robbed, and there was I don't know how many millions of dollars of royalties were owed to them, and it was dramatic in the sense that it was essentially their livelihood. Is this label going to get all this money that they've been working hard towards? Are they going to have freedom to move on? And it's not like they had not a tragedy, like a band like the Ghost inside or something, that had a bus crash and whatever. But I guess just more dramatic than a typical band would go through, I guess.
Sure,
so,
yeah. I mean,
go look it up online if people don't know.
It would still be heavy stuff to go through as a band, I think.
For
sure. I was just laughing at the knowing what they went through. I was that sounds like it was pretty tragic, but all in all, I think this song, I dig this song. It's the message behind it. I think this song I have the most notes on, at least for A Day to Remember. Yeah. Because it was definitely the one that jumped out to me the most. There was another song that we're not going to talk about, but Dead and Buried. I was going to say,
oh, so good.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out real quick before we get into the next song that we're going to talk about. But with Dead and Buried, one thing I really liked how it's written is just in the chorus of the song, how instead of, so he repeats the same phrase, the same words, but the same phrasing twice, where he's dead and buried. He's like, dead and buried, dead and buried. And then instead of repeating it again, he like changes it and then does the yell. Whereas every time I hear it, I expect it to be like the same phrasing 3 times and then change it on the 4th. I was like, he fools me every time. But it's just one of those things on the record that anytime that song comes on, I'm like, yeah, I dig this one. But the next one we're going to talk about is called Life at 11. Now, with this song, I was trying to figure out, like, so is it a play on, like, Live at 11? You know, like, sort of like when they talk about, like, the evening news, the 11 o'clock news, like, live at, if that's what it's supposed to be. Or, like, I'm not 100% sure what the idea is behind that title. Because I was also thinking, like, or is this song supposed to be about, like, a child or, like, something a child is going through or that maybe he went through as a child? I couldn't really come up with anything on it. But it's another one of those songs, though, where, I mean, this band, they just write like anthems, like anthemic choruses and whatever, both musically and lyrically. Like it's something to sing along to that gives you hope, that like kind of just like gets you pumped, right? Like for whatever it is maybe that you're going through, which again is something that I love about that over the time of listening to this band that I've kind of grown to love more, like I guess grown to love more than, you know, maybe some of the like things that I don't necessarily like about the band. Like the fact that the way they write songs and the message that they share outweighs the things that maybe I don't get into, if that makes sense. Yeah.
When I think of this title, the first thing I think of is like, you know, the term like cranking it up to 11, you know, if there's a knob that goes to 10, that,
I like it.
You know, life at, well, and then just, you know, though he's talking about in the chorus, you know, all these voices in my head, or I'm a slave to all these voices in my head, that maybe there's something about music that's therapeutic. You know, Life at 11, you just crank it up, you're on stage, playing loud, and you're just kind of using that as an outlet to deal with, whether, you know, mental health or different things like that.
I like that. That's pretty, like, I'll 100% back that as an idea. Like, because especially going back to, like, the song we just talked about in talking about, you know, like sad songs make them happy, you know, just like the power of music, right? Like to be able to just take these things that are weighing you down and kind of like let go of them by, you know, throwing a guitar over your neck or grabbing a couple drumsticks or grabbing a microphone and, you know, singing and screaming your guts out, right? I'm just trying to see if I can find if there's anything on here about Life at 11, but
yeah, this song to me has, I think this is my favorite chorus on the album. It's just super catchy, and again with you know, the phrasing of the words, and I always like when there's a chorus that makes you kind of grab onto it. It's not just catchy, you know, sound wise, but also kind of makes you like think like, okay, man, like this, there's something good, there's some kind of weight to what he's saying instead of just, you know, kind of a typical chorus or whatever.
Right. I'm still trying to see Dead and Buried. I'm already gone. Trying to see if Life at 11 pops up anywhere on the Wikipedia for common courtesy to save. Like, I like your idea though of it being basically about just cranking it.
Well, I can't imagine it's like something of an 11-year-old person. That seems too young for that. But
and I mean, bands have written stories in songs about different things, right? And so that, like, Life at 11, the first time I saw it, so the two things that I took from the title is it a play on Live at 11, like when you hear, you know, when you're watching a show and the local news affiliate is like, oh, you know, 16 murdered in the inner city, Live at 11 or whatever, right? It's like, wow. Or, you know, like Life at 11, again, like my original thought was, it could have been something that happened, you know, when Jeremy was 11 years old and that he went through, that he was writing about, right? But I do want to, like, the voices in my head part gets me every time, like when he says stop.
That's like a cool part.
It's just, it's so good because, I mean, obviously in the chorus of the song, he's talking about the voices in his head. And then, just to like shut him down like that and kind of like take control again, I just thought was pretty great. Because, I mean, those voices in his head, I'm assuming are more like, you know, whether it's like just anxious voices sort of thing, right? Like going through this stuff and kind of being like, well, what if this goes happen? What if this happens? What if we don't get this? What if this doesn't happen?
Yeah.
That sort of stuff. Or if it's even like talking about someone trying to tell him and the band who they should be or whatever, and that just, you know, like getting tired of that sort of thing, just being like, stop. But the way they put it into the song, and that's again like kind of going back to some of the things they do in their music. I just like when they like, those are like almost little things, much like the Brace for Impact, where that's more lighthearted, but it's just like these little additions to the song that, yeah, the song could carry on easily without that, but adding it just makes this like little special part that you're like, oh yeah, that's this song, and it's brilliant.
Yeah, it's a great song, and I had a hard time kind of picking kind of one of the popular songs, but yeah, I love another part of the song. I love the intro, and then kind of how it comes in really stands out to me and grabs my attention quickly. And so often, I mean, I think I mentioned this before, like just again with access to music or whether it's just ADD or whatever, I always gravitate towards music that kind of grabs me right away, and this song does it, and it keeps my attention the whole time, and so. Yeah, which I think aids, because on this album, there's quite a few songs on this album too, and so
yeah. But I was gonna say it's funny because we were, I think, just this week discussing like over text message about like albums growing on you, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I know you had mentioned you couldn't think of many albums at all that had ever grown on you. This is like, I mean, I guess this album would be included, but A Day to Remember is a band that I find has to like grow on me. Like when I first put it on, one of the notes I had was like, oh, it's mediocre pop punk meets mediocre metalcore, but it makes for an okay time. Like, you know what I mean? Like they're the saying, like a jack of all trades, but a master of none. Like if they just, I feel like if they leaned into being a metalcore band or leaned into being a pop punk band, they wouldn't do anything for me that would separate them like musically from any other bands. And I'm sure that maybe makes a lot of A Day to Remember fans angry, but lyrically they're a band that I go, okay, I always want to kind of give something a second or third listen because of the lyrics, and then it kind of gives the ability for the song to kind of grow on me. The fact that they mix the genres like Easycore does, I mean, works in their favor, because then, you know, they don't come off as necessarily mediocre as a band, right? Like when I think, like I said, if I think about it, I'm like, if they just did metalcore, I wouldn't really have interest. If they just did pop punk, I'm like, his vocals don't stand out enough for me, and you know, like this and that. And so, but as the package, it's kind of this weird, like it's a sum of their parts that is better than the parts themselves, right?
Yeah.
So,
they remind me, this is kind of a weird comparison, but when I listen to them, I think of the band The Dingees.
Okay.
Just especially with that comment you just said, right? Like, I don't know if people listening, if you don't know a band called The Dingees, go check them out. They play punk, ska, and reggae, but they don't really mix the genres.
Right.
But again, if they were just a ska band or just a reggae band, maybe just a punk band, but yeah, you know, but there is something when you kind of have the back and forth and hear the different styles. It's a weird thing because most bands, they stick within that. Yeah. If all bands kind of, you know, if every album had 3-4 genres, it'd be kind of confusing.
Yeah. It is.
So there is.
It is interesting with the Dingees, I was going to say, though, is because when I listen to them, I almost make like 3 different playlists for the Dingees. And I'll be like, I just want to listen to like their more hardcore punk songs. And then you like put that on.
Right.
Oh, I just want to listen to more of their like straight up ska songs and feel like boppy and happy. Or, oh, I just want to like really chill out and relax and put like their more like longer reggae dub jams on. And it's like,
yeah.
And then, I mean, I will listen to their albums as a whole, but it is funny because, yeah, they definitely, I think they do all those or did all those things well. So yeah, it is funny, but yeah, they didn't really like mix them so much, right? Like they didn't do any, like, they didn't really do much like ska punk songs or you know, that sort of thing. But
yeah, so A Day to Remember definitely mixes the genres more. But just as I was listening, I was thinking, are there other like what other bands do I like or that I've listened to for a long time
that do that
where there is different? And so I mean, obviously there's bands that are, you know, are ska punk or, you know, punk hardcore or whatever, but some of those are a bit easier to mesh together.
But you heard it here first, folks. The Dingees, A Day to Remember. same band.
Make it happen.
Yeah, make it happen. The last track we're going to talk about off Common Courtesy is the song End of Me. This is one of the songs I was talking about earlier when I was talking about Jeremy's vocals and how when he sings softer, I like his voice. Like I could probably do with a record like this, and maybe you can fill me in. Do they have like an acoustic EP or record that they've done? I know they've done acoustic versions of some of their songs, but
yeah, no, and I mean this track does get.
Oh yeah, it's
kinda
not
heavier-ish.
Yeah.
It doesn't.
It's yeah.
But yeah, I was just watching the music video to this yesterday, and yeah, like one of my notes was I would love to hear what more of this style would be for them. I mean, it's not necessarily that far off, but it's a bit more moody, a bit darker.
Sure. My only real complaint with this song is that it starts out, for me, it starts out really good, but then like when the band comes in, whether I think it's maybe on the first chorus, it just kind of like turns into, for me, for a period of time, like a generic hard rock power ballad sort of thing. Yeah. It kind of gets beyond that as the song goes on, which saves it. But if it just like, when that first chorus or whatever comes in, if it just did that for the rest of the song, I'd just be like, it's fine. Towards the end, I think it really kind of starts coming together a little more. Yeah. But his voice when he's singing on the verses, I have like, that's more what I'm like, I would like to hear more of that. And there is another acoustic song, like is the song fully acoustic, the other one, or is it similar where it's like partial? Anyway, whatever. Yeah. There is a song on here where they dabble in the acoustics again. And, I really like it, and when he exercises his voice a little bit, it adds something a little different to the record, and I think it's great. Like outside of the part where it gets a little kind of cliche and boring for a bit for me, it fixes itself.
Yeah, and it's a good way to break up the album and show a different side. And I almost wish I don't say this a lot of times about bands that I love, that they would kind of maybe try something different, but it'd be cool to see what them pushing. However, I don't really want A Day to Remember. I don't want them to be a band that like goes more the rock route necessarily.
Yeah, that's I feel
I'm not really
like
sure what I'm.
Yeah, I feel like that's kind of like the risk when you talk about, I mean, bands that kind of, whether they are metalcore bands or in this instance where they kind of dabble a little bit or a lot, whatever, however you want to put it, like in that sort of sound, experimenting, I find a lot of times it becomes like that's, I haven't been able myself to get into Beartooth because the only record I've really listened to is like their latest one where I'm like, it just sounds like a hard rock record. And I heard that complaint, and I've heard they're like a lot of people like them, great band, whatever. And maybe I need to go back and listen to older stuff to kind of get that idea. But I just find like when they kind of start experimenting, when you're more in that world, it just becomes it leans more into the hard rock side of things. And I'm like, that's not where I want to go. Having said that, when Hopes Fall, now this is going way back, but when Hopes Fall changed adjusted their sound from the Satellite years to A-types, like, were you a Hopes Fall fan?
I was a big fan of Satellite years.
Yeah, and then
however, then they did kind of lose me in that. So that's what I mean. Like I don't necessarily like that drastic shift.
Yeah. Hopes Fall's an interesting one, and maybe one day we'll talk about them. But they're interesting in the sense that, talking about albums that had to grow on me, A-types had to grow on me. When I first put it on, I was like, what's happening? Because it's not like he immediately had this like voice that you're like, oh, you've been hiding this, right? Like, why haven't you been singing? Almost like when Alexis on Fire, when Dallas Green started singing more, it was this thing is like, why wasn't he doing that more to begin with, right? Like, because their first record, he sings maybe a few lines over the course of the record. Then the next one, it's like, oh, he features basically on every song. Like, he's singing the chorus on every song, basically, right? And it's like, why weren't you doing this before? It's not like that was the case with Hopes Fall. Like, when he was singing, you're like, okay, it's an interesting voice, but I mean, I didn't need this. But then it grew on me a ton, and like over time, like those like A-types and Magnetic North became like my favorite Hopes Fall records. But which is interesting because that's just a band, I guess, in that world that kind of experimented and maybe I don't know that, because I think theirs always been so atmospheric though that like sound wise they weren't going to get caught up in like the hard rock sort of side of things, like generic sort of stuff. But
right,
would have been a real shame if they did. But yeah, no, going back to A Day to Remember, Common Courtesy and the song End of Me, it is a nice kind of break on the album. It feels like it could be a closer, just in like how it starts quiet and it's slower and it builds and has this big sort of finish, but it's nowhere near the closer.
It's only like halfway through. Or
and am I right in saying, is there a song or something on here where, I think it's I Remember, where they like go on at the end of the song for like 2 minutes where it's just like them talking?
Oh, I don't remember that.
Like it feels like, I'm just wondering, I want to see if it's...
Unless, like, the CD I have is, like, a deluxe edition, so there's 3 extra songs on it. So maybe it's on one of those. I don't remember that part, but...
Yeah, well, and that's what I'm kind of wondering. I want to see... Because I was wondering if it was originally an end track, because it's 9 minutes long, but then on, like, Common Courtesy doesn't say it's a deluxe edition on Apple Music, but there's 3 other songs that follow it. And there's just like this extended length of them talking and basically sharing like tour memories and stuff like that, right? Like, so I'm like, this
does sound vaguely familiar.
Yeah, I'm like, this sounds like it should be the end of the album, which I'm like, that's kind of cool. Like hearing this sort of insider information sort of stuff. And then on Apple Music, it must be like a deluxe or extended edition that they just haven't labeled, because then there's 3 more songs, and I'm like, this makes like 0 sense. Like why these are where they are. I'm curious to see. I still have the Wikipedia open. Yeah, okay, so it looks like the original release does end at I Remember, which makes way more sense that's the end of the record. And then there's 3 more songs. But I was...
and it's on one of those ones, right?
What?
They're talking on it?
No,
those...
No, the talking is on the end of I Remember. Like, so it would have been it would have been the end of the album, right? But
I see. Yeah.
And then there's 3 extra songs, which I was just confused because like none of them are like acoustic songs or like reworks, and it doesn't say like B-side or anything like that. So I'm like, I don't know what's going on here.
Yeah, and I didn't really love any of those extra 3 tracks, so
yeah,
I would have been happy to leave those out. But anyways, I think overall it's a solid album. It's still my favorite one, so I'm interested to hear what their new one's going to be like.
Sure.
And,
one thing we failed to mention is the involvement of Chad Gilbert on this record.
Yeah, well, he's been a big part of their band. Maybe even on Homesick, he started working with them, and I think he's been a part of working on all of their albums.
Yeah, he
up until now.
He for sure wrote on a lot of the songs. Like he was credited. So I don't know. Like, did he produce this album or anything?
It was him and Andrew Wade. So they did the last couple albums together.
Oh yeah, there you go. Yeah.
So whether that was writing and producing or whatever.
Yeah. But anyway, no, there's the artwork that I was looking for. Oh, it's just like the shadow guy standing in front of
a crowd or something.
Yeah. But yeah, no. So that's A Day to Remember, Common Courtesy. The other record we're going to talk about is another. I mean, a band you picked, a record that I've had a touch more familiarity with going into this. It's Chunk, No Captain Chunks, Get Lost, Find Yourself, which I have to say, this band absolutely, I'm just double checking something here so I can make sure I'm right, absolutely loves punctuation.
Just with their exclamation marks in their name.
And then the album title has a comma in it.
I guess so. Well,
they love punctuation.
Well, they are French, so maybe they're just trying to stand out in an English crowd or something with their name. Or. But yeah, the first time I heard this band, it was at a show, and it was playing on the like the PA system in between bands, and I was like, what is this? Like, I've never heard of this band, and somebody told me about them. It was their first full length before they were signed, so it's on streaming services. I can't remember what it's called, but before they signed to Fearless. But yeah, there was something unique about it. Like, it had a similar sound to A Day to Remember, which was fairly present in their sound. But that album also had kind of some more keyboards to it, which I didn't really love that. I'm kind of glad they dropped that later on.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say the keyboard thing is something that I've had a number of people kind of point out as being like, that's the signature of EasyCore. If it doesn't have the keyboards, it's not EasyCore. And I'm like, I don't know if I can go down that path. Like, I think we had a while back, we did, like last summer, we did an episode. I don't know if it's still available or not. I don't think it is. It was in our past life, but we did an episode about ska, bringing up the Dinges again. But we had originally put a rule in where it's like it has to feature horns on a couple songs. Like we were trying to figure out like, well, what classifies as ska, right? Like,
yeah.
I think in the end we took that away and we kind of went because like, oh, I know like I had Interrupters on there, and I'm pretty sure they didn't.
Yeah, Squad 5-0. And
yeah, that's right. We did take it away because we did have some bands that didn't actually feature horns. So like that's kind of like just getting down to like the nitpick sort of thing where I'm like, anyone who hears the Interrupters is going to be like, yeah, that's a ska band, right? Like,
right.
Because I mean, you got the upstroke guitars, you got everything that makes it a ska band outside of the horns. So I'm like, EasyCore is, basically it's pop punk with breakdowns. It's songs written in major keys that are still heavy, right? Like, taking all those influences. And, it doesn't have to have the keyboards. And I am so glad that you picked this record. Outside of whatever that song is, hey dudes, are you ready to? Like that song's kind of fun in a very dumb sort of way. I'd much rather listen to this record. And so I was glad when you kind of picked this one that I didn't have to be like, can we please do, this other one?
There was a Pardon My French. That one was okay, but I felt that they made really big strides with this album. And I mean, there's only a couple of years in between the release of those two albums. And I know they toured a lot, and so I'm sure they gained a lot of experience from that. This one is just a fantastic album from start to finish. I'm also glad I picked this one because it's one of those albums that when I went back to listen, I was like, man, like I really like this album, and I haven't listened to it in a year or whatever. And it was even better than I remember, I remember when they first came out, they were getting lots of A Day to Remember comparisons, but I feel especially on this album, they kind of stand out on their own.
Right.
They have their own sound enough, and I mean, I guess you can compare some of it because, like you said, it is kind of poppier and heavier. But yeah, it's just a better overall written, mature sounding album.
And I haven't familiarized myself with their other records at all. Like this one, I willingly went and listened to actually this past summer. I was on summer holidays, and for whatever reason, I was like wanting to look up Chunk, No Captain Chunk. I don't know what led me there, why that kind of popped into my head. It could have been because as we were driving, we have a DVD player in our minivan, and one of the movies that my kids like to watch is Goonies. So It's possible that it jogged my brain because of, this name obviously comes from the Goonies.
Yeah.
And so it's possible that that's how it got, and I was like, oh, I want to listen to this or whatever. I mean, that was always my initial kind of introduction to the band and fascination was like, oh, that's from the Goonies. Another band with their name from the Goonies, of course, is Slick Shoes. I wonder if there's any one more movie that's had more like band names and like just referenced in songs, because I know like the Ataris, their album So Long Astoria is because the Goonies takes place in Astoria, Oregon, and there's actually like there's lines from the movie in one of the songs. And it's like there's like I believe there's a Fall Out Boy song, Saturday, he references Astoria, and there's thoughts that it's maybe about referencing the Goonies and stuff. So I'm curious to know if there's like one movie out there that's been referenced more times through band names and songs in the world of punk rock. But
well, that's a good movie to reference for.
Yeah, it is. But I was going to say this band immediately is a lot more fun for me to listen to than A Day to Remember. Just in like, they both, I think, kind of deal lyrically sort of with some serious stuff. Maybe it doesn't feel as heavy lyrically that I was picking up on Chunk, No Captain Chunk, but the overall production is lighter and brighter, and the vocals are lighter and brighter. And so it's just like, it feels like this band, when I listen to this, they are like so far out of the EasyCore bands I've listened to, the most directly influenced by New Found Glory when I hear them. Like I can listen to guitar parts on here and go, oh snap, like that sounds like it could be New Found Glory. Like that's pretty awesome. And then vocally, he's obviously closer to Jordan than Jeremy is, like sound. And that's not necessarily what we're looking for, to be like, hey, who copied New Found Glory the best, right?
Yeah.
But it's definitely something that I enjoyed in this.
Yeah, well, they're also the youngest band out of the four we're going to listen to. So
Right.
I mean, their influences would be different. And also the producer on this album, a guy named Kyle Black, has. I was just looking him up today, and he's produced tons of like pop punk bands.
Sweet.
The other heavy band I recognized from there was Comeback Kid. So I think he and I love the sound of his records. And I think he did a really good job of helping a band like this kind of hone their sound a bit and help them kind of stand out a bit more than their previous album. And,
Yeah. And one final note before we kind of get into the songs that we're going to look at. I love accents in music. Like I love being able to hear someone's accent. It's a little different when it's obvious that English isn't their first language. Like I think we talked about this when we did we discuss Millencolin at some point? Was that you and I?
It
was Millencolin and Face to Face.
Pioneers.
Yeah. And Face to Face. And so I think we talked about like the English, not being his first language in that maybe, and how you can pick up on that sometimes. And you can pick up on that sometimes with Chunk, no Captain Chunk. But I always love being able to hear something in someone's voice. But going back to, I mentioned Biffy Clyro earlier when we were talking about A Day to Remember, and the fact that you can, I think they're Scottish, and the fact that you can like hear his like Scottish accent very much in his music. I love it. But so let's get into the first song that we picked. And actually I picked these three, I think.
Yeah.
So the first one we're going to talk about is Set It Straight. On this song, I like with songs, I like going and looking at the lyrics on genius.com, because then if people have annotations and stuff, it's kind of like, oh, they might break down what some of the references are and whatnot. But I love the Genius annotations on this song. The first one, just as like the overall kind of like theme of the song, it says, "This is an angsty song. It seems to be about being mad at someone." And I was like,
yeah,
good job. Big thumbs up for you for putting some thought into that. And then there's an annotation in relation to the lyric where he says, "I read you like a book with all the pages ripped out." The person,
that's the one lyrical note I wrote down.
Yeah, the annotator says, "You can't read a book with no pages. Bert didn't read this person very well," which is funny because I took it the other way, where I was like, I think he read them very well. Like the signs were all laid. Like, I read you like a book. There was not like I knew what you were up to, no matter like how hard it was easy, right? But this person's like, "You didn't read them very well." I'm like, well, I mean, I don't take that way, but unless they're just being like facetious when saying that, I don't know. But what was your note on that one?
Yeah, that was the same one I took away. I like that line. I mean, it's a pretty common one, line to read something like a book, but like with all the pages, taken out. It's like, oh, well, that's, I mean, I'm pretty sure the song's about a relationship of some kind, or obviously another person. And so I just like the way he phrased that. And that's actually something that stands out to me about him, specifically on this song, but on the whole album, is just the way he phrases his words and sings it.
Yeah.
There was lots of times, like this song stood out to me when I listened to it, just the way, I can't remember what the specific lines were, but just did a really good job at fitting a lot of words in, but in a way where it doesn't sound jumbled, and it kind of like sounds catchy and flows with the song still.
Yeah. I know sometimes songs can get wordy and it really disrupts the flow of songs, but the thing that always stood out to me about this song, like, again, like much in the same way we talked about with A Day to Remember, like, and maybe even more so for me, but maybe that's just emphasized by the production that I like more on this, but like just how hooky the choruses are and anthemic. But what I loved about this song was like that opening guitar riff, the kind of clean lick that he's playing.
Yeah. It's
like almost like it's from a different world, like a different era of pop punk, because it reminds me of like Cute Is What We Aim For, or like Rocky Loves Emily, like that whole like really light pop punk where, you know, the guys had their like the long swoopy hair and whatever. I'm sure your favorite kind of pop punk. But like it reminds me a little bit of that. And then it just like, as the song kicks in, it's like, like it just like takes off. And I'm okay. And then this is one of the riffs where I'm like, that sounds like New Found Glory. Like if you listen to the guitars, I'm like, oh wow, like that sounds like New Found Glory, with a slightly different vocal take, obviously, when he starts singing, because he doesn't sound like Jordan. More similar to Jordan than say Jeremy McKinnon would be, but it's just like so bright and bouncy, and which is what I wasn't finding so much for me on A Day to Remember, and that's just the difference in the bands, right? Like this, I'm like immediately, I'm like, yeah, it's kind of similar to when we did our No Use for a Name Swellers episode, where on a different level, because like No Use for a Name, I was really struggling to like actually want to get into it. Whereas like A Day to Remember, I was getting into it, but as soon as I would flip records, I'd be like, I can breathe a little bit, right? Like I don't feel like not everything is so heavy and gloomy, I suppose.
Right. Well, that's one of the reasons why I like having these two bands on the same episode, because while they might be similar in style and influence, there's definitely is a huge, change in sound between the two. So again, like I mentioned, they're a younger band, a bit more like, it's not like a party band, but a bit more that side of things.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I mean, especially maybe not as much on this record necessarily. Nope, I would say they are. With like, just I like that kind of interpretation of them, especially obviously if you go back to "Hey dudes, are you ready to," like, like those songs. I'm like, yeah, they're a lot more like let's go, like let's get this party started. And they do have that vibe some on this album, but more just like we're just gonna hype you up, like it's all good, like it's gonna be a good time anyway, right? Like
just a different kind of energy and a different approach to the songwriting, and just kind of getting. I'm sure. Well, I mean, I've seen A Day to Remember. I know they pump up their fans, but and again, I think Chunk's fans are probably maybe even a bit younger than A Day to Remember, just because they're a newer-ish band.
Except now they're not around.
Yeah, I know, and that's such a bummer. Like after I listened to this album, I was like, man, I want to hear like what's
where
next.
They're gonna go. Yeah.
So I was looking them up online and just seeing. I mean, they're playing Slam Dunk Festival and a few kind of one-off shows.
Oh, so they are still around. Like I thought they were done, but.
Well, the last I saw, they were basically taking a hiatus, a break, and I mean they're playing these festivals. But I mean, it's been like 4 or 5 years since they've done anything. So
like
I'd be definitely curious to hear if they came back, what their sound would be like.
Yeah, this record came out in 2015, so it's been a little bit. But I would welcome another Chunk, No Captain Chunk record for sure. Because I think describing it as more, not just saying strictly they're a party band. Like I've compared, I don't think it was on the show, but in our conversations I've compared Seaway, basically saying like once I realized they were a party band, I was like, okay, I can get behind this. And I mean, if you watch almost all of the Seaway's music videos, there's parties happening in them, right? Like they're just like a feel good band. And I was like, oh, now I don't feel like I have to try and take them as seriously, right? Because I mean, they're playing alongside all these like other more serious pop punk bands, right? And they'll have some serious songs, but all in all, they're like, let's just have a good time, right? And so like I would be comfortable in like in the world of easycore being like, yeah, Chunk is a party band. Like, I mean, they didn't take a name that sounds like it could also be, a hardcore band name, right? Like no hardcore band's gonna be called Chunk, No Captain Chunk, but A Day to Remember, sure. 4 Years Strong, sure. Set Your Goals, sure, right? Like, and all of their like logoing and like imaging is all kind of like based more in that, right? Like big block bold letters and whatever.
Right.
And then Chunk is like, let's just write our name real messy like.
Yeah.
but it's got to have proper punctuation. That's what matters.
Yeah, right.
The second song that we were going to talk about off this record actually comes right after this one. It's called Pull You Under. And the reason I wanted to talk about this song was because of how poppy that first song is. Not first song, it's not the first song on the record, but the first song that we just talked about there, into the next song, which is like maybe, I want to say probably their heaviest song on the record.
Yeah, that's
at
what I
least
wrote too.
at least right off the start of the song, it's their heaviest
Yeah.
song on the record. And so I just like, and A Day to Remember does that too, where they kind of contrast, you know, a poppier song with just like hitting you in the face on the next song. And so that was kind of a similarity I saw for sure between the bands. And it kind of, I want to say this is the first song on the record that is that way, like that heavy from the start. So it kind of almost comes a little bit out of left field. I mean, knowing what the band is, it's not entirely, but at the same point, it's like, yeah, all of a sudden they're just like screaming at you right from the get-go on that song. And yeah, no, I love the contrast though.
I did notice on this album that there is less screaming overall, which I felt really added to the album.
Sorry, you felt the screaming added to the album, or the fact that they kind of dialed it back added to the album?
Well, both. So they dialed it back, so that adds. So it means that when they do the screaming,
sure,
it adds it in a way. Because I felt like, pardon my French, you know, they just
for a second there, I thought,
album.
Yeah, for a second there, I thought you were about to drop an F-bomb. It just really felt like, pardon my French, but holy.
Yeah. You know, it was too. You could tell with Easy Core when it's forced, right? When it's like, well, we've got to have a heavy part, so we're just going for it.
Yeah.
Whereas in this, I mean, one, I love the riffs on this album, and you know, if we're comparing them to A Day to Remember, I find that these guys are definitely more riff based than you know, song structure or whatever based. And I love the riffs because they're catchy and heavy and melodic, but there's something about it that's not just the same. Like there's some kind of uniqueness. I don't really know how to explain it in a musical term, but yeah, I love that on this album. I'm glad. I don't know if that was their choice or a producer who told them to do that, but definitely. So on a song like this, where it does have that heavier part, it does hit you more instead of just like, okay, this is the heavy part. It's like, oh, like, okay, I want to listen to this song.
But then even with it being a heavy song, like the hook on the chorus is still immediately infectious. Like it gets stuck in your head real quick. And so like, which then kind of brings me to my next point in asking, at this point in their career, because again, I'm not overly familiar with their previous albums, but is it possible for them to actually write a song that isn't anthemic? Like that's, and maybe that ties into like your party band idea where it's like, man, you know that I'm going to assume that seeing these guys live, and let's say like in a club show, not like at a festival or whatever, but you know, it's you and 700-800 people, whatever, and it's just like a full-on sing-along and everyone's having a good time.
Oh yeah,
right?
Like,
awesome. Yeah, like that's the vibe I get, to the extent where I'm like, they could play. I didn't watch any of their music videos. I've seen the music video for, I got to figure out what the name of that song is.
I didn't see any music videos for this album, only for their first one.
Yeah, they may
like
not have any
cover
for this
songs
one.
and whatever.
Yeah. I don't know if they actually have any In Friends We Trust. That I got to get that name stuck in my head. In Friends We Trust. I've seen the video for that one, which again is like basically a party, right? Like they're just surrounded, but that's what the whole song is about, is friends. But as far as on this record, I don't know if there's any music videos. I didn't see any that came up. Like I didn't go searching for them either, though, right? So. But yeah, just all in all, man, this band is just fun to listen to, and they're easy to listen to. Easy core. Yeah. That's the point, right? No.
Yeah. I mean, overall, you know, on this album, I don't have any like standout lyrics that really like hit me.
Yeah.
You know, like maybe some of the A Day to Remember songs, but I mean, this is a good one about, you know, just pushing through and hardships and chasing your dreams, things that, you know, could be relevant in kind of any situation in life. And so,
yeah, I think, you know, if you're in a situation where you had to pick this record or Common Courtesy, if you pick this record, you're picking it knowing that you're sacrificing maybe a little bit in the lyrics game, right? Like, not to say they're bad lyricists or that they're lacking necessarily, but they're not as, I don't find anyways, that they're as impactful lyrically as A Day to Remember, and I don't think they set out to do that, right? Whereas, like I said,
it's coming from a different place, so it's understandable.
Like I said, with A Day to Remember, I feel like that's very much a part of, if not the entire band, for sure, like Jeremy McKinnon with his songwriting, like he's going there going, I want to be able to help people with my songs. Again, hence things like Self-Help Fest, right? Like stuff like that. So coming into this record, you're not going to, having said that, there is a song that we're going to talk about next that lyrically it's what actually hooked me. But yeah, like all in all, I think when you come into this record, it's just like, you just want to come in here and have a good time. You might have some angst. You might have some, hardships that you want to get through, and it's going to help you do that. But at the same point, you just want to jump around and sing along.
Yeah. Well, and you need albums like that too. I don't
100%.
always want to listen to music and have to think. So I'm glad there's lots of albums like that out there.
If you didn't need albums like that, bands like Blink-182 wouldn't have made it anywhere in the first place.
Right.
Right? Like, let's be honest. Maybe they've, in the later years of the, and by later years, I mean, holy crap, that's now the early years of the band when they first kind of switched from, Take Off Your Pants to Untitled or whatever, like in sound. They got a little more serious, I think, going into those late, like Untitled and on sort of thing. But obviously they hit their peak by writing silly, lighthearted songs in the first place.
Right.
So the last song we're going to talk about off of Chunk, No Captain Chunk's Get Lost, Find Yourself is the song Worst Case Scenario. This was the first song on the record, and I wanted to, because I think you had actually sent 3 songs, and I was like, what if we did these 3? And one of the ones you sent was Pull You Under, so we were both in agreement on that. But this was the first song by Chunk that as soon as it stopped playing, I started it over again. The intro is stupid cheesy, like the acoustic guitar and the whistling. Yeah, I could do without it for sure. But as soon as that guitar hits, and then the chorus, like when it comes in, and just again, the message behind the chorus is similar to, as we talked about with A Day to Remember, on the song. What was that?
About music kind of.
Yeah, was that? Sometimes You're the Hammer by A Day to Remember. Yeah. On this song, for sure, like when he talks about like what worst case scenario, just turn up your stereo. Yeah, it's just like, and I'm like, exactly, like, man, when I have a tough bad day or whatever, and I'm just like, the first thing I want to do typically is like just put headphones on and be away from people, right? Like when I go through heartache sort of thing, like when I've lost family members and whatever, what's the first thing that I do? Typically is I pick up a guitar or I'm listening to music, right? Like that's just the way that music is. And so this song, as soon as it was done, I was like, I mean, I wasn't in a bad place where I was like, I need to hear this, but I was just like, yes, I can get behind this. And I was like driving through the mountains, it was on, and I was like, I just got to hear that again and just put it on again. I'm like, keep driving. Yeah. I just got to hear that again and put it on again. And it was like, I don't typically do that either with songs. I'm like, I'm more of an album sort of guy. And so I'm like, I don't want to just repeat a song, or I just want to listen to an album from start to finish. But yeah, for sure. The first time it hit me, I was like, yep, we're going to listen to that, because it's also stupid catchy too, right?
Oh, yeah. So good. Yeah. And I love that the bridge kind of brings some heaviness to the song to break it up too, because I mean it is definitely one of the popular ones on the album, so it does redeem itself later on in the song. But yeah, I remember that intro is just like, oh man, like yeah. And it's also, this is like a really nitpicky thing, but this song and the one before it both start with whoa. And I was like, why would you do that 2 songs, right?
Yeah,
whoa or whatever. But
yeah.
Anyways, after it gets past that part, it's a really good song.
Yeah. I will say that, I mean, I didn't necessarily notice that. I noticed it a few times on the record where they go to just like the woes or whatever. But at least with the gang vocals on this record, compared to say like Homesick, at least they don't obnoxiously get in your face.
Right.
But that's, Homesick is its own thing. Yeah, I don't understand the intro to this song, why it's on there. Like what the point of that was, the acoustic guitar and the whistling. I was like, that was a thing you chose to do. All right.
I know. It seemed like a bizarre.
At the same point, it makes it memorable to be like, as you're going through, it's like, what if you don't remember the name of the song? You're like, which song was that? And you're like, oh, I remember this stupid intro.
Yeah,
but
that's true.
It's also like when I think about this record, it's also the song that gets stuck in my head without hearing it, right? Like,
right.
Where I was like, oh yeah, immediately I'm singing in my head, worst case scenario, right? And I was like, oh, there it is, stuck in my head, which is funny. Like going back through notes of songs and being like, man, I wrote in here that this song is really catchy, but I can't think of how it goes right now. But worst case scenario, 100% I can.
Turn up the stereo. Yep.
Exactly. So that's going to bring us, I think, maybe just kind of some quick closing thoughts before we get out of here. So if you were on a desert island and you could take only one of these 2 records to listen to for, like, let's say it's not for life. You're gonna some ship is gonna find you in a month. You got to listen to one of these records for a month. Which one are you picking?
I'm going to go with Common Courtesy. One, because it just impacted me a lot more the first time I heard it. I don't remember the first time I heard Get Lost, Find Yourself. That doesn't mean it's not a great album. But I do like the diversity, especially if it's the only one I have to listen to. With Common Courtesy, it's like, okay, I could put on, an acoustic track or this, or if I'm feeling angry because I can't catch any fish on the island, then I'll put on some of the heavier tracks and thrash around.
Because I can't catch any fish. I love it. I think, it would be interesting because I like the being a guy who likes looking at lyrics in songs. A Day to Remember definitely offers more of that, I find. But at the same point, if I'm thinking about like being stuck on like a desert island, and I'm going to be fishing in the sun, it's hot on the beach. I'm like, man, this just reminds me of like more beach music. Like I feel like I'd have a better time listening to Chunk, no Captain Chunk, and be waiting for my Captain Chunk to come save me, as it were.
Right.
I think
that's true. It probably overall is better beach music.
Like it make you feel like you're on a holiday more.
You didn't say it was a nice beach island. It could be like what's that island that's like the most dangerous island that's covered in like thousands and thousands of snakes?
Oh, jeez. Well,
there's some island that like people aren't allowed to go on. So.
Then you're just gonna die. So what does it matter, right? What does it matter? It's a beach island. It's a tropical island. It's just small, and you're in the middle of the ocean. So you got to catch fish. You got to eat coconuts. It's the movie Castaway. If you are Tom Hanks in Castaway and your best friend is a volleyball that has your bloody handprint on it, named Wilson, which record are you bringing with you?
Okay, well, now that you're setting the scene a bit more,
that will forever be the scene.
Making me sway my.
If we ever ask this question again, forever the scene will be Tom Hanks in Castaway, and your best friend, your only friend, is Wilson, and you got one record. So between these two, are you still going with A Day to Remember, or did I actually sway you?
Well, see, and
I'm not trying to sway you.
When I think of islands, I think of the show Lost, because the whole show happens on an island.
Such a good show.
There's a lot of up and downs on that show, and there's so when I think of that island, I'm like, A Day to Remember, because there's some different up and downs on that album, and if I'm getting
A Day to
murdered by the others, then maybe I want to listen to the end of me, or
A Day to Remember can definitely get you psyched up for going to war with the others, or facing the smoke monster, or all the things in Lost. That's fair. I'm still going with Chunk, though. I'm going to go with Chunk, but I like both of these records.
Why don't we just go to an island together and we take both albums?
Oh, we could do that. We could both.
Hey, in our fantasies, we can do whatever. If
we
this
both
is what we choose
survive
to do,
the plane crash together. That's how it has to go. We have to crash on the plane in Lost, and we both just have to have some kind of like a phone or whatever that we can also charge. That's the thing. When people talk about the desert island sort of things, like, how are you planning on playing this thing? Eventually,
right, exactly.
Yeah, if it's a phone, eventually it's going to run out of battery. I don't know. Anyway, those are getting way too into it. But yeah, no, that's fine. Both of these records are good. Common Courtesy did grow on me more out of the two albums. Like I started it going like, whereas like Chunk immediately was just like, I like this record. So
yeah.
But I think they're both good. But I'm going with Chunk. You're going with A Day to Remember. It's fine. It's fair. That's the way it goes. So that's gonna, I think, wrap it up. Another episode of Growing Up Punk. We are gonna do 2 more Easy Core albums. Did you pick them this time? Did you have them ready? Because I laid it on you last time.
Yeah, I do. I'm just blanking on the title of. I always want to say "Stick to Your Guns," but it's not the band.
Set Your Goals.
Set Your Goals. It's with the blue cover.
Oh, yeah, I'm looking it up right now, so I can hopefully tell you.
So the 4 Year Strong album.
Hold
would
on,
be
I'm on
Enemy.
Set Your Goals right now. With the blue one, like, is it like a turquoise blue kind of?
Yeah.
This Will Be the Death of Us.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So This Will Be the Death of Us from Set Your Goals, and then what did you say? 4 Year Strong was
4 Year Strong, Enemy of the World.
Is that the one with like the comic book kind of cover?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good record. Which is funny because like that's another one where I've Yeah, okay. I've listened to that one. It's already actually downloaded on my phone.
Awesome.
So there we go.
Yeah,
and by the time we get that episode out, actually, no, this episode come out, and now 4 Years Strong is out. When we're recording it, it's not out yet, but when the episode's released, so whatever. It's all a mess now. It would have been great if we timed it so that 4 Years Strong would have come out when the new 4 Years Strong record came out. But
oh, yeah. Well,
that's coming up. I'm excited for that one. But anyway.
Yeah.
That's going to do it for another episode of Growing Up Punk. Again, go follow us on social media, on Twitter and Instagram at Growing Punk Pod. You can find our personal handles there as well. And wherever you're listening to this show, you can find it anywhere you find podcasts. Rate, review, subscribe, that kind of stuff. Tell your friends. If you're listening on YouTube, I say this all the time, go find us on your favorite podcast app because you're missing out. We got music on the podcast apps, but not on YouTube. So I love how awkward it sounds sometimes. Especially when it's an interview and I do an intro and I'm like, yeah, that interview is coming up right after we listen to such and such a band. And then on YouTube, it just goes straight into the interview. I'm like, psych. But yeah, so find us wherever you find podcasts. You can find us on YouTube. If that's your choice, fine. But that'll do it. So bye-bye.
People in the audience, then this was horrible. All the people started getting sick and throwing up all over each other. I never felt so bad in my entire life.